Being a US-based Africa tourism organization, I hope to uniquely facilitate today's masterclass conversation around the diaspora travel. First, a special thank you to Reed's Africa Travel Week team for sharing their Africa Travel Week Connect platform for this important discussion. The diaspora is a key target audience that presents a significant opportunity to further realize Africa's potential. This is not a new conversation, but obviously given the reckoning or awakening that is taking place across all sectors, now is the time to actually act on that potential. Our hope is that after this masterclass better understanding the diaspora travel and the diversity that exists across the diaspora. If you walk away with nothing else, please definitely understand that the diaspora is not a monolith. We are all things. We enjoy cultural activities. We are luxury travelers. We are adventure travelers. We have accessibility needs. We are members of the LGBTQ plus community. We are baby boomers, and the list goes on and on. Get started, please. In question chat or queue as many as possible. Now I'd like to introduce my dynamic panel representing various perspectives across the diaspora. First we have David Eliku, founder of the Democratic Republic of Coffee and also founder of Baba's Fight Club. Paula Franklin, co-founder of Franklin & Bailey. Lorna K. Johnson, principal of Global Linkages. Mimi Salamella, curator and director of MM Connect. And Ernest White II, producer and host of Fly Brother. Thank you all for joining me, and I'm looking forward to getting all of your perspectives. To get started, I'd like to ask each of you that as a traveler, what are some of the things that are important to you and what informs your travel decisions? Starting with you, Paula. Paula, you have done work in the industry representing luxury brands, and in terms of traveling for leisure and traveling as a mother of two, what does that look like for you, and what are the differences between those different types of travel?
I think for me, it's sort of, I don't like the term, I'm a traveler, not a tourist, because I think in reality, we're kind of all tourists and we're out of our home country, but it's sort of feeling like we are part of the culture where we are. My girls are 7 and 10, so they're not babies, they understand what's happening. And it's really just about understanding the culture of where we are, as little as like a local coffee shop, making sure it's small restaurants, not booking in the biggest chain hotel, really deciding what neighborhood we're going to be in, the walkability. I think for me, it's just really more like I want to see that place as opposed to sort of seeing inside of a hotel.
Understood. And Lorna, your company does extensive work on the continent and building. You also curate your group experience, for baby boomers. What makes baby boomers special in terms of the experiences that they are looking for? And what does the intersection, of being part of the diaspora and being a baby boomer mean when making those travels?
Well, for us, that spectrum of baby boomers goes from those who had these romantic ideas of the continent when they were in school in the 70s and 60s, to those who, now that they're free, they may have their own businesses, they may be retired, they may just have this dream of going to the continent for the first time. So our population kind of covers that whole gamut, but it really is our mission and interest to have them to have, no matter what stage of life they're in, to have not only a realistic and authentic experience with the continent, but to hopefully become in love with the continent as our company is as well. And with them being baby boomers, we also have to define what that comfort level is too, because comfort for a millennial is much different for comfort for baby boomers. So we cover that whole gamut in our work, in our travel services.
Thank you. Ernest, you produce a successful travel documentary series. How do you determine what cities and countries to feature? And how does that decision differ from your own personal, preferences in terms of where you want to travel?
Sure. Thank you, Melody. For me, they actually are one and the same. I enjoy places where I feel welcome. where I'm able to really connect with people because people are open to engaging with me as someone from a different place, someone who has never experienced the place as it is in that moment, even if it's a place that I've been to before. I think one of the main issues as a Black American traveling is I definitely look for a place where I'm going to be received without being perceived as a problem or as, someone that's unwelcome. And so those connections, those linkages that I've made in my travels, particularly on the continent, for season 1, we filmed in Cape Town, in Addis Ababa, in northern Namibia, and in Casablanca, all places that kind of represent a little bit of the diversity of the continent, which of course is, huge, but then also places where I have made connections with people just by being, in the space without having been a television host, just a tourist, just a traveler, just an explorer. Some of the people I met on couch surfing, people who for my sexuality was not a problem, my nationality was not a problem, and all of those things made me feel like I want to share this with the world. I want people to know that you can come to the continent, you can be received, and you can be a part of the community no matter where you're from or what you look like. So that's part of the mission, and it's why I'm excited about extolling the virtues of the continent to anybody I can.
No, thank you. Really appreciate that perspective. David, moving on to you. More often than not, when people talk about diaspora travel, they're talking that tends to be the diaspora from the US. You're based in the UK. So what are you and your peer group or, the groups that you travel with looking for when they travel, especially when they travel to Africa?
Sure. I think it's an interesting one, actually, because you're definitely right. I think a lot of the time, particularly now that travel has become so much more globalized and we're able to, even like having this masterclass now, or even just discussions about travel in general, we're able to share ideas and we're able to interface and interact so much more. So I think there's a lot of parallels, but I do think that perhaps it's just a market that's not often considered as much as the rest of the continental US. But I definitely agree with some of what Ernest and Lorna as well had touched on in terms of, I think particularly safety, only because I think there's a lot of negative perceptions around traveling across the continent. There's a lot of things maybe you'll hear about, even if it's in Nigeria or in South Africa, you hear stories or different things, but I think it's so unreflective of what life is like, both for living there and also for traveling there. And I think people don't necessarily see the variety of experiences you can have in Africa. So because there's so many different stereotypes or perceptions that people have before coming, it's really about challenging those and then shaking them up a bit. I think people might be worried about another thing, from the UK, a lot of people just speak English. No one really speaks French, for example. So people might be hesitant to travel to Francophone countries or to places in Southern Africa. So I think it's really about challenging that, because I often find, even in my travels in Francophone Africa, when you're there, people are just as friendly, just as receptive, just as eager to help you and help, whether it's helping you get around, helping you find whatever you're looking for. So I think a lot of it is about challenging those perceptions and encouraging people to actually travel across the continent.
No, absolutely. And Mimi, you run a creative organization and you are based in South Africa and a frequent Pan-African traveler, across cultural interests, luxury interests. As we were moving through COVID, the most recognized recovery plan centers around domestic and regional travel as a priority. As a seasoned traveler, what are you looking for travel, and does it differ because you're actually an African resident versus coming into the continent as an international visitor? You're on mute, Mimi.
There we go.
Yep.
All right, can you hear me now?
Yes, we can.
Thanks. I think it does differ for me as somebody who is on the continent, but not necessarily too much. I mean, my goal really is to simplify travel on the African continent. And so, as you say, it's COVID times. what we are doing now is exploring South Africa more as opposed to going out of South Africa. So people are used to, a lot of luxury places are obviously used to receiving guests from outside South Africa. So they do have to get used to the idea of South Africans traveling within South Africa, especially the luxurious places. But on the continent as a whole, I find that people are as open to receiving me as they are to, let's say, an African American or a person from the UK or Europe. It's really all about connecting. Everyone's looking for authentic experiences. If you come with an open mind and you're aware that you're not, you're on the African continent and some things are not as easy to access as other places. People are receptive, they're open, and it doesn't have to be as difficult, and as David and Ernst says, if we just open ourselves more and we manage expectations, the experiences can tend to be very amazing. But yeah, it's not, people are very happy to hear that you are African and you are traveling the continent. So that's always a positive.
No, you're absolutely right. Thank you. Ernest, I want to go back to something you said, that you want to go to where you feel welcome and where you're going to be received. So how do you make that determination? What does that look like?
For me, it means going to the place anyway, without knowing whether or not I'm going to be. It means being adventurous.
You figure it after the fact.
Exactly. Yes. And I can't think, I've certainly been to many more places than the 4 places we featured in the series, mostly just because, it's a show. It's not it's not a YouTube video series, which means it's not something that's easily produced just while you're there necessarily. But I've been to Dakar, I've been to Malawi, I've been to Kenya and other places where Cape Verde, where I really, again, was able to kind of meet the right people. And when I say the right people, I mean the people who came up to me, the people that I engaged with, and they engaged in conversation and brought me home to meet their families and just had that kind of, that family style interaction. I recognize that part of that has to do with the way I am in the world. I go out seeking that and I find it. And I know, like Miss Lorna was talking about with, in terms of levels of comfort, not everybody has that level of comfort. Not everybody has that expectation or that desire to even go out and explore in that kind of way, And so, but I do think that as a journalist, as a storyteller, it is my job to go out there and find out how every place can be engaged with in a way that, in the end, I say it's welcoming here. You can be welcomed here. And I also recognize that not every place is going to be the same with regard to, again, sexuality, but also nationality. And particularly now, the US response to COVID and how our passports are mud at the moment. And so, there's work to be done.
Right.
I'm willing to do the work. But it's also in the messaging and the way that I kind of set expectations based on my own experience as a tall, highly educated, English-speaking, formally educated, masculine presenting dude. Like, my experience is going to be different than a woman's experience, than someone who's in a wheelchair, than many different types of people. So just bearing all of those things in mind, those matrices as I engage, I still find ways to be welcomed. And that's why I have that kind of desire to continue exploring and continue to change the narratives for as many places as possible.
Thank you.
I hope that answered your question.
It absolutely did. Thank
Okay.
you. And Lorna, along those same lines, I think we've had this conversation offline just in terms of how, as a group, especially with baby boomers, they're oftenly ignored in the conversations. We'll have luxury conversations. We'll talk about millennials and Gen X, or we'll talk about the diaspora. But in terms of drilling down to what baby boomers need, or their unique needs in terms of when to a destination, how do you determine destinations and experiences make sense for travelers?
Accessibility. Well, a lot of our participants are baby boomers, but not everyone is a baby boomer. So when we have an experience, I think the one that's most evident is Morocco. we do Morocco. And the beauty of Morocco is that you have places like Fez, that's 800, BC. But given that the opportunity to experience that, if you are physically challenged, can be a problem. So does that mean that that person shouldn't have that wonderful dining experience where if you tried to get there on your own, you couldn't? So I say all to say is that we don't discourage anyone to go to certain places, but we warn them, but more importantly, we try to provide support. No one, their religion, color, sexuality, physically should not be prevented from experiencing the world. And particularly if there are people who want to experience the continent, we're for it, but we do have to make adjustments. So in places like Morocco, and that's probably the most challenging one because, you have a lot of walking, you have the pass and the souks. We make accommodations, I always hire, and I'm lucky for my business to have a team of local folks. And what that does, it makes people feel much more comfortable. So they're getting paid, which is important. They're not necessarily tourist folks, but they're there. So we try to do that in trying to make people feel much more comfortable. And before I finish, for us, the experience begins the day you make your deposit. Okay, the trip begins then. And so we do a lot of hand holding, and it doesn't matter, because like Ernest and Paul were saying, people are really, and David, some people are just really crazy about going to the motherland or going to Africa. And so and they're especially, I've had people to drop out for trips next year because they feel that Africa's the problem, but we're the problem with COVID, right? So, but what you do is you handhold them. I look like them in a way. I've been to the continent over 200 times, and you work it with them. And, most of them adjust, but it is, you have to have that type of love affair and desire to do that and be willing to make. In South Africa, we use some scooters for certain places, particularly in Joburg and Cape Town, where it's easy. We don't have a whole line of folks, maybe one or two, but it's nothing better than seeing someone at Robben Island, on a scooter to go into Mandela's cell, which they may not have had that opportunity. So it's just kind of thinking outside the box and trying and be loving. Like my colleagues said, you have to love the place and love the people so you can connect the love together. And I think that's what we try to do with our work.
Oh, well said. Thank you. Paula, just interestingly enough, as all of you sort of gave your perspective in terms of what you're looking for, how you make travel decisions, there wasn't anything that you could say, well, that's sort of a Black thing or a diaspora thing. It's more, this makes sense. This makes sense for me. This makes sense for the people that I'm traveling with. So it's almost as if whether it's going to the continent or to other places, regardless of, let's say, marketing messaging and things like that, we're going despite the lack of seeing people who look like us. We have an innate desire to, I would say, explore and to connect. That's obvious. So when you look about the potential in terms of growth and how many people do make decisions based on where their friends have already been, what they see on social media and the like, what do we have to do to take that to another level? So more people are making the consideration. As much as I know, even friends who are well-traveled, there's still sometimes a mental block, even about, going to the continent for whatever reason, those mental blocks from perceptions, from the narratives and things like that. So first, Paula, I'd like to go to you, since you are in the PR world and have that marketing perspective. What do we need to do to sort of start to chip into that so that we can really, really realize the potential? I think a lot of us are tired of talking about the potential and want to let's start to move the needle forward in a really meaningful way.
I think a lot of it is kind of what Ernest said. We have to kind of be okay with going to places, but we're going to be the only. I think that is one, just kind of a reality of how we travel. I've traveled with my family, and we're the only Black people in an entire hotel. And it's interesting now because my almost 11-year-old, she now notices it. She's like, "Are there any other Black people here?" I'm like, "Nope, but get in the pool and order your we're good, like it's fine, but yes, we are. And I think from a PR standpoint, I think one, it's the writing, because I think there's a writer who I'm a big fan of named Sebastian Modoc, who is Indian and Colombian, and he writes a lot about how his perspective is just different. So talking about Morocco, when you read about Morocco, it's the market is hectic. You're going to get badgered by the shop owners, or you read about places like India, like, oh, it's manic. But if you look like us, it's not the same experience.
Exactly.
Like I walk through a market in Morocco, I kind of look Moroccan, depending on what I'm wearing, depending on who I'm speaking to, I'm not getting that. And I think you talk about diaspora travelers, if you are from Lagos and you go to Delhi, it's not going to be like, oh my God, this is crazy. And so I think if a lot of the writing could talk about that, like this is not everybody's experience. Not everybody is scared to take an Uber in Cape Town by themselves at night. I'm a survivor. I do it all the time. I'm still here. And I think that is really important. I think just in the marketing materials, I think if we could just, especially in like the African safari space, if we could just move away from Black waiter, older white couple. I know that is the reality. I go on a lot of safaris, and I think it's the marketing, it's the age, it's the cost, it's the perception that every safari needs to be 3 weeks in 19 different national parks. It's not the reality. But I think it's just a lot of allowing different perspectives to tell the story of where you're going. I think would be huge. And then just the really basic one is the pictures. Throw some color into your marketing material, advertise in a few Black-owned media companies, pay a few Black influencers. And I don't think it's hard, because like you said, we're going anyway. So a little bit of effort and there'll be more.
No, absolutely. And I know, David, we talked about this in terms of your travel. There's a lot when people, when I mention diaspora travel sometimes, there's an automatic assumption that it's just sort of heritage travel. There's the interest is solely West Africa, given the transcontinental slave trade and that. And there's less talk about luxury travel. There's less talk about like solo travel, especially around men. And I know, David, you've done both. So I'm curious as to your decisions in terms of those experiences. I think we've stated you're doing it despite, but what would make them even more palatable for someone like you who travels by themselves, who likes luxury travel, who plans trips for others as well?
Yeah, I definitely agree. Ironically, I just wanted to touch on one thing that Paula was just saying as well, because I definitely think one of the main things as well, it does come back to the PR aspect as well, particularly in images. And that's something that I've definitely tried to work on a lot in terms of when I run my trips through Diverse Flight Club, is the fact that, with so many of these things, even within Africa, Black people or people that look like you are not featured as part of the messaging or the marketing. And even you can go to like the national tourism pages of several African countries and you look, and it's not, the people, it's not the people that you're really going to see when you're on the ground there. And so I think that is a big part in changing the narrative in terms of making people feel welcome, and also making people feel like they can enjoy a variety of experiences. Because I think if you're only advertising, say, the safari experiences to this group of people, or, whether it's scuba diving or exploring or doing different things, when you're only showing, a particular group of people, it doesn't seem like it's accessible to everyone else. So I think that's a huge part of it, because I think there's definitely some countries, maybe Tanzania or Madagascar, or where people expect maybe that they could have a certain type of experience, but people don't necessarily realize that, oh, you can actually go to other places in Africa and also have amazing experiences. You can go to Kenya or to Uganda or to Congo and have, great experiences there as well. And so I think it's showing and highlighting those things. And like Paula mentioned as well, highlighting the Black businesses that operate there, because I think there's just a lack of visibility of the infrastructure that we have, because it's actually there. I think part of it is just maybe not communicating and linking up and talking historically, but I think that we're definitely getting towards that space. But there's so many opportunities and so many things that people are doing on the ground You know, just recently I was talking to someone from Liberia who does things there, and I'd never been to Liberia. And again, maybe you have these thoughts of what it will be like, or you don't know because you haven't been. But actually, I think by connecting and by highlighting the different experiences that people are facilitating, we can, you know, create those for everyone and entice more people to go and travel across the continent. So I think a big part of it is in terms of the messaging and the PR. And yeah, bringing people to the continent for different reasons. Because I think, you know, the people that are only going to come maybe for business travel, or only going to come for a certain type of thing, you know, they already kind of have the perception of what they're coming for. But I think it's maybe challenging that and showing that, oh, actually, you can have these other types of experiences as well. Like if you want to go adventuring, if you want to enjoy these different types of things, you know, yes, there are the markets, and yes, there are these kinds of things, but that doesn't have to be the only experience that you have. You know, if you go to Morocco, you don't only just have to be in the market. There's other places in Morocco that are completely different, right? So people think that, oh, I have to go to Europe to live like this or to have this kind of experience. But actually, no, you can do that in Africa. You can do that in other places as well. So I think, yeah, a lot of it just comes down to the PR, what we show, and the way we talk about Africa.
And I know you mentioned this, does it make a difference if it's a Black business in terms of highlighting Black businesses? Is that a preference? So as you're looking at, you know, where you're going to stay, what you're going to do, maybe what tour operators you're going to use, what restaurants you're going to visit, does that help inform those decisions? Like, do you want to know, do you want to know what are the Black businesses in the city? What are the Black businesses in this destination? Anyone can just jump in and answer.
Definitely for me.
Yes, definitely matters.
I'm extremely intentional, especially in South Africa, where we know that can be a challenge. But that's what you get, you know, and I'm talking from the bus companies to, you know, to the places we eat, to we provide innovative bags. It's very intentional. And I find a lot of people who are African American don't have that perspective. But I think if we have the power of the purse, you know, when 1 year when the Rand was very low, I think it had gone down to 14 Rand to $1. I had a group that spent beyond the amount they paid over $100,000 in the local economy. Now, some people bought high-end rings and things, you know, like that, but you have to be intentional. And I think you have to do that in several places. We use your partner, Naledi Janetas, Marianne Loon Martin, as our partner in Marrakesh. So even in places where it may not be obvious, I mean, West Africa is kind of easy to do it. Of course, you know, East Africa, but even we sought out Marianne. You know, we're even doing a virtual book party for her, you know, for her new book that's coming out. But it's important, because if we don't designate our resources, particularly in a place like South Africa where the challenges are still, then who's going to do it? So we try to do that in every place, whether we're eating, and it's not just in Soweto too, you know, in the township, it's all over. But you have to be extremely intentional, and you have to ask questions. We have a wonderful event at one of the few Black-owned wine companies in Cape Town, you know, that people didn't even see. But it takes work. It's not easy, because the other tour operators aren't going to always tell you, oh, you don't want to go there, you know, for whatever reason. But no, yes, we do. And we want to spend our money there. So we're very intentional about it.
Thank you. And Mimi, did you want to weigh in as well?
Yeah, I did want to weigh in, as Lorna said. I mean, obviously, as somebody who comes from South Africa, historically, most of the places were white owned, but it does matter to our clients that our vendors, our suppliers, everyone that we use is Black. I mean, when I was curating for Travel Noir, we had every supplier was Black except for a white farm where we went outside of Joburg. We went to the Cradle of Humankind. And every single time when we got to the farm, and the clients found out that the owner of the farm was white, you know, it really just, they were not happy about it, but we do try our best, and it does make a difference when you do spend money and it's Black owned, especially in Africa. You know, people are not, they don't understand a country like South Africa. It's not the same as everywhere else where, you know, historically it's very Western. and that kind of stuff. So yes, we do try by all means to support Black business. And as somebody like me, we have access to all vendors. We have a list, and we do direct people to the right place.
Yeah. And Mimi, just staying with you, just in terms of what I've seen, I know we touched on it a little bit, just about Africans exploring Africa as well.
Yes.
But I see it seems to be trending up, right? In terms of, I don't know if it's the growing middle class, younger people have more disposable income, and I think it's a very specific age group, right? Maybe 25 to 40, whatever the case may be, that are more inclined to travel the continent than going to Europe or Dubai or coming to the US or what have you, as I've seen in sort of over the last 10 years or so. What do you think has driven that increase of interest in staying on the continent?
I think it's a combination of factors, Naledi. I think social media has played a huge role in that, because as everyone was discussing, historically mainstream media does not put our photos up, does not, the marketing does not speak to us. And so people created social media pages, people started blogging, YouTube, everyone is, we see Black people traveling, we see the Black perspective, and it's wonderful. We all want to be those people. And I think obviously for people who are coming from outside of the continent, affordability, traveling on the continent, as opposed to going to Paris, you could have just as wonderful an experience in Dakar or in Swaziland, Lesotho, South Africa. So yes, I think it's social media. I think it's affordability. I think it's people being conscious, people being aware, people trying to connect, get a sense of who they are in the world. So yeah, it is a combination of factors, and it's really amazing how much it's picked up. And I know that a lot of African countries are trying to improve their infrastructure to accommodate a lot more people who are visiting.
And with the travel that you're seeing, are you seeing people traveling more just independently, almost as we said the same thing? People are traveling to Africa from the US or from Europe despite any marketing efforts. Is that the same case even as a South African in South Africa? Are you getting any marketing messages, or are you just organically making these decisions to visit these other destinations?
For myself, 15 years ago when I started, I was just doing it on my own because I had an interest. But right now, people are coming together, and doing it as groups or on their own. But initially, it was just me having an interest, and
Right. No, it makes sense. And you talked about the diversity. This is a question for everyone, and I'll start with you, Ernest. I want to show the diversity also in terms of, no matter what your profile is, like whether you have a family or you're luxury, the type of things that you want to do while you're traveling. So Ernest, starting with you, what are the type of activities and experiences that you're looking to do on the ground for yourself, for your show? You're on mute.
Thank you. Personally, I actually like going out dancing, and that's not something that's going to be happening anytime soon, unfortunately. And so that's also not something that we really can show on a television series, mostly because this releases, you got to have signs. People might be out creeping, so you don't want to accidentally have their faces appear having been in a nightclub.
So that's actually conversation, Ernest. Okay.
No, this is family fun, pre-family fun. Anyway, but I would say definitely that's the thing. That's the challenge for me. My show is all about friendship and connection. It's about engagement with people, and because of social distancing and just this new world that we're in, and obviously we know, being people of African descent, Black folks, we do stuff together, that's kind of, it's natural, and anyone on the continent, Black or not, like, it's just a very kind of family and humane community style of engagement. And so for me, I guess now wanting to figure out new ways to engage with people, I would say, yeah, I'm going to have to think about that hard, because really the things that we've done before have required a lot of people in one place, even if that's just going to a cool restaurant. Or we filmed during the Timkat Festival in Addis Ababa. When we were in northern Namibia, we were at in a village to visit the king, who kind of had a whole coterie come out and they presented traditional dances and that kind of thing. And that was also a situation where nobody was 6 feet or 2 meters away from each other. So I think going forward, you've really given me something to think about as how we can engage, still show the dynamic and beautiful cultural offerings that the continent has to offer in ways that are safe for everybody to engage in.
Makes sense. David, on to you. What are you looking to do, or activities in two different ways when you travel by yourself, and what are your groups looking for when I know you curate special groups and things. What are they looking for?
Yeah, so it's a good mix actually, because I think sometimes the things I might like to do personally are not always the same as what groups might like to do. But ironically, it does follow on a lot from what Ernest was saying, because I think, you know, for me personally, when I travel, I like getting lost wherever I go and just being part of the local culture and just doing things, eating where local people eat, and really just embroiling myself in the culture. I don't like feeling as though I'm kind of separate. I think a lot of the times you can go to some of these places and almost have like isolated experiences. Like, did you really visit Kenya, or did you visit your hotel in Kenya? Did you just visit like that specific resort? And you know, so I really want to make sure that I'm getting to see people and also putting money into the local economy as well. Not that, you know, I have all this money to give anyone, but I think it's more from the perspective that the more you kind of do interact with local people, the more you can kind of, I think it goes two ways, because it also gives people on the ground positive representations of wherever you're from, because sometimes people might only meet one person from whether it's the UK or the US or wherever, and they base their entire experience off just meeting that person. So I think the more people you get to meet, the more you get to spread a lot of that. I would say with groups, I do think that quite often people do like things to be a bit more curated, at least just to have a plan of like knowing where they're going and what they're doing and knowing where things are. So I think for a lot of people, those things are super important. And I guess that's where, I know Laura mentioned before, in terms of having local contacts and having people on the ground that can help with things and can facilitate things. Also, so that if people want to do something that's a bit more spontaneous, then they can. So you can say, okay, here's someone I know that can help you go and do this thing. If you have something that you really want to see or that you really want to do, then we can look to facilitate that. So I think it's a mix of people wanting to create their own experiences. There's a bit of luxury element there as well. And so again, I guess it's expanding what people can expect from Africa, because people don't always, I think sometimes because people don't know the breadth of experiences you can have, they're not even looking for it. They're not even thinking, oh, I can go to Addis Ababa, as Ernest mentioned, and I can do this and I can have these kind of experiences. They're not even expecting to have that. So I think when you can speak to people on the ground and you can build at least a small network and provide a variety, then I think it opens people's perceptions and their expectations of what they can do, what they can enjoy, the types of places they can travel. Like Paula was saying as well, in terms of, you know, being in South Africa, like what's actually safe to do. Can you take a cab? Can you go here? Can you go there? So I think a lot of the time, if you've only internalized what you've been told about a particular African country, you can miss out on a lot. So I think it's really, there's a lot of work that goes into that as well, like exposing people to just local life, local people, and helping them to understand and be able to navigate for themselves.
And specifically, name 3 of your top activities.
Okay, sure.
Is it
3 of my
restaurant? Is it shopping? Is it water sports? I want some specific.
Okay, I've got you. I do like shopping actually. I think particularly, again, seeing the local variety, because the kind of things that people sell, also looking at things that people make, like sculptures, art, things like that, is something that I really love. So I love going to those kind of artistic areas and areas where people make things. Sometimes it's by the side of the road, but I know even, you know, like when I was in Soweto in South Africa, being in Gambia, you see people just make all kinds of crazy creative things on the side of the road. So I think even just being able to stop off and jump out and seeing what people are making and creating in different areas, I think is a big one. I would also add maybe more adventure type things. So riding camels in Morocco or certain parts of Africa as well can be a lot of fun. Skiing, which people don't necessarily realize that is something that can be done in Africa, well, in some areas. So I think, again, this is kind of goes back to what I'm saying in terms of I think a lot of the time, and it's largely to do with marketing, people don't realize how much you can do in Africa. But, you know, when you say, oh, you know, I've gone and I've done this, and I've gone and I've done that, that's when people start to wake up and realize that actually you can do so much. And also, I think a big part of it is seeing the variety in terms of different countries, because Africa is really so different. A lot of the time, particularly, you know, when I talk to people from certain countries, they think of Africa as just one big thing and everything's the same. And people will say, oh, I just went to Africa. Like, where did you go in Africa? Because it's so different. Even within West Africa, if you were going to Nigeria compared to if you're going to even like Togo or Benin or places that might be neighboring, like super close, but actually you can have very different experiences. So I think that's a big part of it as well, because if you go shopping in Lagos, I'm sure it's probably not the same shopping in Morocco, for example. And so I think, yeah, there's a lot of interplay there.
Thank you. And Paula, I wanted to ask you, as from with your family hat on now, I know you mentioned in terms of sort of just making sure that, you know, your children are comfortable when they're traveling, they're starting to notice, you know, if they're the only ones there, but what are they wanting to do when they travel? Like, and how, and do you have to plan ahead for that? You know, what does that dynamic look like from a family travel perspective?
I would say I don't like to have trips fully pre-planned. I'll do basics. I actually have a really good sort of partnership with my husband. He finds the food, I find the hotels and the activities. And we sort of, because I'm really good at vetting a hotel, so we will definitely have like a few meals planned and a hotel, but other than that, we kind of wing it. I am lucky in that I'm raising 2 small foodies, which was very intentional, because that's half the reason why I travel. So there's a lot of, I do love a really small a small food tour company, like, you know, someone where they, you know, they sort of go out every few days just to really, you know, understand the food culture. I think with kids, a lot of it is sort of downtime.
Mm-hmm.
And just making sure that they have like a few hours by the pool, because the reality is they don't want to be hitting the pavement, you know, even older kids, just, you know, having a little bit of time to sort of do nothing, which is where nature often will come in, you know, go for a hike, you know, just sort of go out, you know, go up Table Mountain, like make them walk up and down until they're really tired by the end of the day. So I think, you know, obviously, like, you know, if you have younger, like I no longer schlep things around. So if someone has to deal with like strollers and car seats, like that's a different, like I throw my kids in the back of an Uber and we go. So I think it's, you know, a lot of it is planning, but not too much, because you probably won't be able to keep that schedule, you know, with your children. And I think you want to, you know, you want to go to the market or you want to go to a mall or somewhere and have that shop owner tell you, oh, you should go check this out. And I think I always want the time for go check that out. I'm a big fan of shopping for jewelry, you know, so if I find out like, oh, there's actually like another place down here where you can get more, you know, there's more jewels that way. That's where I go. And so I think a lot of it is just understanding the place. And I think for my older one, kind of explaining to her before that, you know, we're going to a place and these are the kind of people, you know, who are in this place. We went to Iceland recently and she was like, there are a lot of white people here. And it's like, well, we're in Iceland. So like, we're not expecting diversity here. It's like, it's different, you know, depending on where you go. But I think it's a lot of just sort of preparing them and having them learn a little bit about the country where they're going. You know, what is the history? You know, why is that there? And I guess like one other quick example, she's in Spanish class now. And she was like, do you know that there's a country in Africa where they speak Spanish? And I was like, why do you think that is? And she's like, I have no idea. And I was like, well, a conversation. or English or, you know, French in Africa. So I think that context is important for them. So when they go, they see it. And I do think that a lot, this is not necessarily for me, but because we're talking about general family travel, I do think that most Black families who I know do want to travel in numbers. They do want the sort of the tour operator to tell them that it's safe. You know, they want to go with 3 aunties and cousins just to sort of create this bubble of, you know, if something weird happens, at least there are 25 of us to like contend with. And I'm just, because I've traveled so much for so long, I don't like to travel with large groups because I feel like then you have to have conversations about the schedule. Who wants to do this? And I don't want to do that. But I do think that when you're talking about, when I look at my friends and how they travel, it's a lot of like, how do we get the numbers in? So I think it was, we were saying before, you're kind of creating your own experience. And I think that's probably something that we as Black travelers are going to do more than a lot of other cultures.
That makes sense. And Lorna, I know Paula mentioned like the family group travels, and something that there's a lot of talk of sort of the Black travel movement and group travel. The reality, it's been here for a while, especially like church groups have been traveling for decades, and families have been traveling. And I'm curious in terms of, what are they looking for? What are your groups sort of span are multi-generational. Yes, they include baby boomers. So how do you determine what activities are the most pleasing to the masses, so to speak, especially on the continent?
I think when we've dealt with family travel, and most families, if they're going to Southern Africa, they want to do a safari, for the children. But we also know that most families are looking to travel coldest in Southern Africa, so you have to kind of share that information with them. I mean, yes, they can get into a pool perhaps, and they can go to Durban, for the weather. So those are the things you kind of advise. Churches, and I'm actually working with a church for Ghana next year, and they're actually going to have a service on the grounds of the Cape Coast Castle Dungeon. And I'm so excited about that. We're already working with the board, the museum board, to do that. And they want that type of experience as well. And what I find across the board that I would like to share, and a lot of people kind of frowned upon it because it has a somewhat missionary, is that we have in every place we do. And we even work in Cuba, and we almost got, I won't say arrested by the government, but had some issues with community partners. I think people of color, whether you are, some of us are first generation from folks who we may be partnering with in the continent, want to have an understanding of authentic realism about what the continent is providing. So we provide, and it's a hassle, and I get so much pushback in the beginning. I don't want to bring these things. I don't want to do that. But we have a system where we ask people, we're not just talking about, certain donations, but things and items, and of course money, that we ask people to share. And what has happened over almost 20 years, it has come to be the epitome of the trip. Just case in point, and I'm saying this because I know you're a Delta, Naledi. I work with a Delta chapter in Northern Virginia, and they've done 2 trips in the area during Valentine's Day. And if you can't be with your significant other, what else can you do? You can give agape love. And in both examples, when they were in Ghana and South Africa, they had a magnificent opportunity to connect with people. And even though, as we all know, we may have the largesse and the resources, we're actually getting back more, when we connect. And I think that's what people forget. You may be able to give people money, you may be able to help build a school, you may be doing this, but when you see the dignity and what people can do, you're actually reaffirming your own humanity, and you come off of this travel experience as a better person. So we do that. We do that in Morocco, of course, South Africa, in Ghana. We're going to be doing it in East Africa. And like I said, we work in Cuba to give people that meaningful, so they can talk to someone who is setting up a daycare to help women who work in the township. It's not filtered, but right. So they get an understanding of that. We work with a wonderful social enterprise organization in Langa, in Cape Town, where they're helping young men get work. We hear a lot about women. So all of this feeds into, and the goal is not the trip. We want you to keep supporting them after the experience. That's really the seductive nature of all of this. And we find that sometimes, not everybody, of course. We were able to raise almost $10,000 during COVID for some of our partners, because everything was shut down. So for me, as African American people, we connect with that, because that's part of our own, whether it's our own personal heritage or we know some of the suffering, quote unquote, that people are doing at home too. So that's an important element in our work.
Yeah. Okay, thank you, Lorna. And Mimi, when you travel, what are you looking for specifically? Like, what type of things are you doing? You know, what makes your needs unique from some of the other groups within the diaspora?
For me, Naledi, it's just exploring everything that the continent has to offer, whether it's safari on horseback, whether it's hot air ballooning, whether it's swimming in a natural spring, whether it's visiting an artist studio and seeing them create. I also love learning how to cook authentic African food, you know, taking food lessons, going out, exploring the nightlife, not where the tourists go, but where the locals go. I love to make something, pottery class. It's really just, you know, I also love hiking. Yeah, so it's quite a lot of of things that I do like. I like to be busy. I like to immerse myself in the culture. I don't like to feel, while I do like to go to some tourist sites, especially if they're, you know, important sites where you learn about history, the history of the place, I don't like to do too many touristy things. I like to feel like I'm at home. I like to learn languages. I like to speak and make friends with the locals. So yeah.
Oh, that's fantastic. I wanted to offer a question out to the group that came in. I'll start with you, Paula, just given your PR background, about someone wrote in just asking about how you reach the diaspora in the US or the UK or other European countries. You know, what are the Black media or influencers that you would suggest, or how would you suggest going about looking for them or identifying them?
When we're talking about Black media, and I think, you know, Ernest will also, I hope, agree with me, but I haven't thought about this. I think it's actually a lot more on social media than it is like the print media that a lot of white travelers are looking at. I think a good example is I was at a conference in Accra last year when we still had conferences. And I just booked through Tastemakers because I knew them through the industry. I booked just a day trip to the Cape Coast because obviously something I wanted to see. And I was put on a tour with a group of travelers from Atlanta, like it's like a Black friend group. And of course, I'm like, how'd you get here? What magazine did you read? Like, I'm berating them with questions. And they had found the tour guide who was contracted with Tastemakers on Instagram. And they were like, and they had booked a 3-day tour with him. And, you know, I was talking to the tour guide also, and he was saying that almost every traveler to the Cape Coast is a church group or a sorority group, that oftentimes they find him through social media. So I think, you know, just to go back to that point, we're figuring out a way to get to these places and get information outside of, you know, the mainstream media. And I think, you know, it is, if you start down the kind of rabbit hole of Black travel pages on Instagram, it's pretty massive. And I think, you know, we want those pictures. You know, I do think, you know, talking about the boomer travel, I do think that movement largely leaves out travelers over the age of 50, which I think is a mistake. Because those are people traveling like you don't. So just to put that out there, I do think it tends to skew younger, more millennial, but I think that is a huge market because just there are not a lot of travel magazines who are catering to this. But I think it is also, you know, Essence Magazine they do travel coverage. There's a really good magazine, Blue Media. How do we spell it, Melody? Devon's company.
I think.
Yeah, we can put it in the chat in a second. But he does a lot of. It tends, like right now, a lot of this content is going to be domestic, but that's not always the case. You know, I think, you know, I'm assuming that Ernest's audience is going to be pretty heavily, you know, Black or of color, just because it's a different perspective. You know, we sort of established that we travel a little differently. But I definitely think that social media is a bigger one. But just as a last point, I call what's happened since March a sort of racial reckoning, because I find it just fascinating, like how this ripple effect is hitting every industry. But I think a lot of the mainstream travel media has been forced to sort of realize that they're not being inclusive in their coverage and in who's writing it. So you're seeing a lot more coverage of, or a lot more stories by Black writers in those magazines. I don't know if it'll translate into the readership. I think that sort of remains to be seen. But I would definitely, you know, make a push towards social and influencer markets. I think that's just the reality of how we get our information.
And Ernest, as an influencer and content creator, you're obviously on that list. Who else or what other platforms do you recommend in terms of discovery and things like that? And how do you suggest others to connect with you or other individuals? What's the best way to go about it?
Sure. I think there's ways of looking at social media kind of in a differentiated way. You know, if you look at Instagram, where you're hitting millennials and younger folks who are all about the visuals and reflecting what they want to see. You've got Facebook groups, you've got other, that older people who've got the disposable income and often got the time to go, boomers particularly. I mean, my parents are on Facebook and they're engaged in groups through church, through their sororities and fraternities, university alumni associations. By the way, Miss Laura, my mom's a Delta as well. So, I was raised right.
I'm in good company with Naledi.
Yeah. But so those are ways of engaging with the groups that kind of have historically been going. Now they're chatting more on Facebook and some of the other, well, I guess it's just Facebook. I can't think of any more off the top of my head. When it comes to traditional media, like Paula was saying, we've been ignored for so long. That's why most people don't look to the New York Times or to Condé Nast Traveler for information about Africa and African destinations, but because a lot of people who were looking to those anyway are people who would have gone anyway and probably have already come to Africa anyway, however, with my show, it happens to be on public television, PBS. That's important because the audience does skew older. And I've been continuously getting comments from people who are like, oh my goodness, I never thought about this country, that country. I never really imagined it in that way. It's not just Africa. It's like Sao Paulo, Brazil, for example, where we showed the importance of Afro-Brazilian culture in the development of Carnival. So it is about hitting the diaspora and other places too, India, for example. But my point is that if engaging with visual storytellers who are working with public television or mainstream television, that's another way to kind of really blast the message out there in a way that to a market that may not necessarily be on social media. Sadly, as a print journalist, as a lover of the written word, I have to say magazines, as much as I love them, are really a dying breed. So the focus on traditional written journalism, I would say, should be kind of secondary. Don't give up on it, but it's not really what it used to be.
No, that makes sense. And David, in the UK, how are you using or finding, influencers or content creators and the like?
Yeah, I think it's very similar in terms of social media. I think has a big impact, particularly on a younger audience. I think in the UK it is a lot younger in terms of the audience that is traveling to Africa in that way. So a lot of it is maybe millennials, some even younger people as well. Because I think what's interesting about the UK maybe that makes it probably quite a lot different from the US. I was just thinking and talking about this the other day on the podcast that I'm on, Travel and Turn Up. But it's interesting because, if you're in the US, you can travel an hour or so away by plane and still be in the US. That's how you travel domestically to other places. Whereas in the UK, an hour away, I'm now in France or I'm now somewhere else. So actually, even from quite young, if you do want to travel anywhere, you're already kind of used to the idea of needing to fly. So actually, I think we have a much younger population that does fly and is perhaps used to flying, because an hour flight that only costs like 50 or 60 pounds, and you can go to France, you can go to Spain, you can go somewhere else. And then I guess from that, it's now coming to Africa. So I think they are super engaged on social media. So Instagram quite a lot, Twitter as well. We find works a lot. I think Twitter can be hard because if you yourself, I think, don't really use it, then I think people can find it hard to navigate or hard to find people, because it's very much a place of interconnected web. So a lot of it is about people talking to each other and having small communities. But I think if you yourself are on Twitter and you can talk to people and connect with people in that way, then you can get a lot of leverage and find a lot of people there as well. And I think through that, that's how you can kind of connect to people that have influence. I think another thing, even with considering influencers, particularly from a travel perspective, I think is also trying to find maybe more micro influencers or people that have more leverage, or people that actually, you know, are just very well connected and people that people listen to, rather than people that just have a big following or because they have a particular job or they do a particular thing, that eyes are on them. So I think that can have a huge impact as well, because I remember this wasn't actually a trip to Africa, but there was a trip that we had to the Philippines, and I didn't know anyone on the trip, obviously, but I think there were like 2 people that were on that trip that had gone to university with someone that went on a trip to Japan that we took earlier that year. So again, you can have a lot of these concentric circles of connecting with people that, you know, just have a lot of friends who are well connected, rather than just only looking for people that have lots of followers. So I think that's definitely something that's helped as well. It's just, yeah, making those kind of connections.
Yeah, thank you.
Can I follow up just really briefly?
Oh yeah, go ahead, Ernest.
Thanks. And I wanted to say something that address something that Mimi mentioned earlier. She talked about how she just was kind of traveling because of her own interests, you know, and it turned into something a bit more professional in PR and marketing and that kind of thing. Same thing with me. You know, I started a travel blog in 2008. I was living abroad in Latin America, talking about life as a Black American who looks a certain way, traveling in these different countries. And that 10 years later ended up becoming a television series. So I would say definitely it's a good idea to engage with people who are saying important things, even if they don't have a big following. If it's on Instagram, if it's on Facebook or Twitter, or if it's a blog, that kind of thing. You know, it's looking at people who you can probably identify it early on, like they're saying interesting things. Eventually they'll have their own TV show. They'll be editors at publications. And so it really is thinking about the long game as well.
Perfect sense. Thank you for adding that. Mimi, question for you, and which I'll ask to others as well. If you had to communicate any messages to any DMOs or the industry at large, the travel trade, what would you suggest, or in general, what is it that they need to do or understand to reach the diaspora in a more meaningful manner? And I'm going to have everyone answer that same question. So,
sorry, Naledi, can you say that again? You were breaking.
Yes. Oh, I'm sorry. I was saying, if you had to communicate any tips or understandings for the DMOs and the industry at large, what do they need to understand to reach the diaspora in a more meaningful manner than they are now?
Oh my goodness. I mean, you know, the thing is that people always ask this question, do Black people have a different travel experience to other tourists? And it's so strange, because if you can speak to everybody else, you can obviously speak to Black people, but also have an understanding that obviously the way they occupy the world is different. You know, our existence is shaped by prejudices, by a lot of other negative things that happen. So if you can make things not awkward for travelers, for visitors, make it, you know, more accommodating, more open, yeah, that would make life a lot easier, because people are interested in traveling. People want to go out, people have money to spend, people want to explore new places. And yeah, just be human, you know, be open, be hospitable, do what's right, what makes sense.
Lorna?
Yeah, I think we do travel differently with the focus of intentionality. I think the DMOs need to understand that's not everyone, but we need to be presented that opportunity. And, you know, certain language and how it's used and how people are communicating is really, really important. I did just want to add, with the social media, with baby boomers, that can be a challenge. You know, we run even WhatsApp groups for each trip. And I can't tell you how many of my under 40 staff have to work with people to learn that. But that's okay, because they're, you know, they're able to do that. So I think it's just understanding. But I do think the Black travel movement, for most people, want to have a deeper connection, and they want to be made aware of how that can be done. They can choose not to take it. Just like having, you know, when you're going to Cape Town, you're not shown, for the most part, the Black wineries, the few that are, you know? So offer that, they may not. They may be very much into wines and want to see some of the best wines in the country, and that's fine. But if you don't offer that, so I think them having a different way of how we want to experience the travel world, you know, in that, I think that's really important for them to know, and that we are different, you know, in many. We do, even at older ages, sometimes want to party, you know, we want to do jazz club, we want to do a lot of things that most people are going to go to bed at 8 o'clock at night, you know. So, you know, some people spent many years saving up for this one trip, you know, so they want to maximize it. So I think it is having a certain understanding of what is culturally appropriate for us. And it's not always the safaris. Matter of fact, many times it's not, to be honest with you. So.
Absolutely. Paula?
Yeah, I would say the biggest thing, you know, to sort of piggyback off of Lorna's point, that we're not all the same. That I think there is like this perception, you know, it's almost like Black Twitter, like we have our own little bubble somewhere, and we, you know, it's just, we are, you know, we can probably be broken down into the same groups as other travelers, you know, who travels for food, who travels for adventure. I think, you know, sort of going about it as, I think the only commonality would be that we don't want to feel uncomfortable when we travel. I think as long as there's like a reassurance that when you go to that property, that you're not going to feel strange. You know, I am often the only person of color who wasn't working at a safari camp. And I find that, you know, it is so catered to older white travelers,
Absolutely.
especially the luxury camps. And I think, you know, just sort of a few tweaks, you know, on how, you know, on how one travels, you know, a lot of it is representation, but I think it's just more, you know, consider the fact that, you know, it might be uncomfortable for, you know, for a Black traveler to, you know, to go into a village and look at, you know, poor children in school, which I'm personally very against. But I think, you know, just understand that that's going to be a different experience, you know, for a traveler of color, you know, that maybe, I don't know, just, I can't really think of anything specific right now, but I think it's just, we want to feel comfortable. And I think apart from that, the interests are just as vast as any other travel. I think that's important to know.
Absolutely. David?
Sorry. Sorry, could you repeat the question?
Just in terms of if you had to communicate one thing to DMOs or the industry at large in terms of what they need to understand to reach the diaspora or to more authentically engage with them, what would it be?
I think I would say two things, which are kind of interconnected. But I think on one hand, it's definitely having access to local people. So I think making sure that people that travel can connect to, you know, the people that actually live in the country and are not kind of just isolated in a small bubble somewhere within a resort or wherever they're going, but that can actually interface and understand and appreciate what the country has to offer and what life is like for people that live there. Because I think even so, I'm originally from Nigeria, and it's always an interesting thing when we have discussions about, you know, people go back every December, but it's funny because I think even the people that go back in December don't really live the same lives as people that are there all the time. It's still very different. So I think being able to give people an appreciation of those differences and those nuances so they can actually understand the places that they're going to and how different people live and what life is like. So I'd definitely say that that's one side of it. The other side I would say is, again, kind of what we touched on before, is reaching out to other aspects of the diaspora. So bringing people, Black people particularly, from different aspects of the global diaspora as well, which I think is a huge thing because we come with slightly different experiences and different expectations. And I think it's important to connect people in that way. I was in Ghana in December, and I think that was a great example from, you know, how they had the year of the return. But, you know, when I was there, I was meeting people from the US, I was meeting people that came from other parts of Africa, people that came from France, but these are all Black people. And I think that is huge from the perspective that, you know, we're all there for the same thing. We can all experience and enjoy the same thing, but we're also able to share our experiences with each other. And I think that's definitely something that I think we could do a lot more within the travel industry, is kind of reaching out to, whether it's people from the UK or people from Europe or people from other parts of the Black diaspora, because, you know, there's plenty of Black people there that would love to enjoy those experiences. So I think it's, yeah, just reaching out to more pockets of people.
Ernest?
I definitely feel like, to not repeat something that's been said, but also to kind of piggyback on what David was saying. You know, I lived in Brazil for a while and loved the fact that I could fly from Sao Paulo to Johannesburg, you know, nonstop, and really, and also from like Rio to Luanda. So there were links between South America and Africa that I definitely think can and should be really engaged with. You know, of course, with Bahia, for example, being like the largest conglomeration of Black people in one region after Nigeria. The thing is, of course, you know, you've got disruption in the travel space right now. South African, I don't even know if they're flying to Sao Paulo anymore right now. I think Reginald in the comments talked about some of the challenges of vetting infrastructure, travel time. The US side, of course, the short vacation periods that we get that make places like Barbados, Haiti, Cuba, that are closer, much more desirable destinations just from a time standpoint, you know. And so those are the things that obviously can't be addressed in one call, and they're certainly requiring a lot of like organization and cooperation between many different actors and stakeholders. That said, I think for DMOs and service providers, those are things to think about. You know, how can you make an experience more enjoyable for someone who just flew over, who is in their 60s, just flew over, probably in economy class from the United States, which means a whole day of travel. You know, it's going to take them a week to kind of, you know, shift their time zone, their body clock, and then they're about to go back at that point. You know, so what are ways of kind of shifting timelines for certain things so people can participate in all of the amazing things that there are to participate in? And I know that it's a challenge, but they're just questions to ask. You know, how can we recognize what the travelers may be experiencing on the way here so we can kind of provide an experience that is optimized in that way?
Oh, that's quite helpful. We have to wrap up soon, but I want a quick wrap up question to all of you. One, have you started traveling? If not, when will you be ready to travel, and where on the continent? Mimi?
I've been doing a lot of travel around South Africa, which is amazing. I mean, when we went into level 3, we could kind of travel from one province to another. So I've been doing Limpopo, Mpumalanga, Cape Town, obviously, yeah, but not outside of the country yet. But some places like Tanzania are open. I know Mombasa's opening soon. So I'll probably be traveling in November, December to some places outside of South Africa.
Thank you. Lorna?
We had to move all of our travel experiences this year to next year, but hopefully we're on. Hopefully we'll have about 100 people in Ghana next year, 2 different trips, as well as about 50 people in South Africa. The others are going to be moved. I won't be traveling until April, and I'll probably will hit Ghana, South Africa, you know me, I do a month to 6 weeks. And if I can get out sooner, because everybody knows that this COVID sit down is not good with my soul. I'm not, so I need to get out. I need to taste and smell the continent, you know. So as soon as I can get out, I am. Luckily, I was in South Africa the beginning of the year, and we got back right just before. But I'm out of here. Everybody else and not be afraid. Whether you use us or anybody else, make sure your plans to get to the continent in 21.
Thank you. Paula?
I mean, you know where I'm going first. I had a trip to Senegal in mid-March, and I'm incredibly bitter that I didn't get to go. So that will be my first place. We have done some road trips and weekend trips. I don't think I'm leaving until after the election. I just feel like there's too much of a chance that I end up living in whatever country I try to visit in November. So yeah, I think that for me, it's probably a early like January 2021, depending on our situation. But Senegal is definitely up there. I would love to take my daughters to Ghana and kind of, and also do, because like I mentioned, I was there for a conference a few times, and I would very much like to go not working. But yeah, those are my, but I think for now it's sort of road trips in California as soon as the fires stop.
As soon as you can breathe outside, yeah.
Yeah.
David?
Sure. So I'm thinking, originally I would have wanted to go somewhere that I haven't been before. I feel like I haven't traveled as much in Central Africa and some parts of North Africa, like Liberia. But at the same time, we've been busy, I've been working, I also want to relax a bit more. So I've been thinking about maybe like Tanzania or Kenya. So possibly around December or early January, I'd be looking to travel. Because I feel like for me anyway, those are places I can relax. Like I've been to Nigeria and Ghana a lot. Ghana actually, I feel like I could really relax there, but Nigeria not so much. So again, it's a mix.
Ernest?
Wow, I mean, I have to say, I'll go to the first place that'll have me. U.S. passport. But I think, you know, we've got some irons in the fire, not only with season 2 of Fly Brother, but also a couple of other productions as well. I still have not been to Nigeria or Ghana. I had an aborted trip to Ghana years ago when United dropped the flight from DC to Accra. So I'm bitter about that, and it's been years. So you know, I'm still kind of excited to get to those 2 places that are so crucial to the diaspora. But at the same time, I mean, every place is so magical and amazing to me, you know. And so whoever is like, come on down, baby, I will be there.
Fantastic.
And what about you, now, lady?
Oh, as soon as I'm coming home to South Africa. I'm like literally just waiting to open. I haven't been home since February, so it's like an eternity at this stage. So I'm ready to come home. Yes, as soon as I can. Thank you for asking. Thank you for asking. And thank you to all of you really for your time today. You guys have been dynamic. I appreciate you sharing all of your diverse perspectives. Thank you to all of the attendees. I hope you found today's session valuable. And I really sincerely hope that as we move forward as an industry, the conversations become more diverse instead of having the diversity conversation. A special thank you to the entire team at Africa Travel Week, with an extra special shout out to Amanda and Martin for making this possible. Cheers.
Thank you, everyone.
Bye-bye.
Bye. Bye.
Thank you. Bye.